Get this man away from me. He touched me. He breathed on me. Get him off this plane. The words sliced through the first-class cabin of Summit Airlines Flight 619 like a blade through silk, sharp, ugly, and so profoundly wrong in a way that certain sounds can be. The kind that makes strangers freeze and exchange glances with the same stunned expression. The one that silently asks, "Did that just happen?" And yes, someone had said it out loud. Then came the sound that would echo around the world. Not a slap or a shout, but something smaller, and somehow even more devastating. The soft, wet sound of a woman drawing back and spitting deliberately, precisely, with full intention, directly into the face of the quiet man seated next to her. The man did not move. He sat perfectly still in his seat high above the Atlantic Ocean while the spit slowly tracked down his left cheek. His hands rested open on his thighs. His breathing remained steady. His eyes stayed fixed on some middle distance that none of the horrified passengers around him could locate. He did not wipe it away, not yet. He simply sat there, silent. And in that terrible silence, he was more powerful than anything that had happened in that cabin. The woman who had spat stood over him, chest heaving, her face flushed with the particular red of someone who has gone too far and knows it but cannot walk it back. Her cream Dior coat, her blinding jewelry, her manicured hands gripping the headrest like she needed the world to stop spinning. The champagne on her breath mixed with red wine. Her eyes were wild, bright, terrified of what she had just done. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea. This is where the story ends. Here is where it begins. A few hours earlier, the terminal at JFK smelled the way it always does, jet fuel and floor wax and that specific kind of anticipation that lives only in airports, the sense that everyone around you is heading somewhere that matters. The terminal moved with its usual organized chaos, rolling suitcases, announcement speakers, the distant crying of a child who did not want to get on the plane. Gate 47 was quieter. This was Summit Airlines territory, and Summit Airlines was not the kind of airline that attracted chaos. It was the kind that attracted a certain type of person, the kind who had options, who had chosen this carrier specifically, who expected a particular standard of everything from the moment they handed over their boarding pass to the moment their driver met them at arrivals. The airline had been built that way deliberately. Every detail was intentional, the midnight blue and gold branding, the cabin design that felt more like a private members club than an aircraft, the staff training program that took 3 times as long as the industry standard, the champagne, always Krug, poured before wheels up, the overnight kits in their hand-stitched pouches, the way the first-class seats converted to fully flat beds with linens that cost more per thread count than most hotels charged per night. The man who built it was not at headquarters today. He was here, at Gate 47, moving quietly through the boarding queue in a faded navy hoodie, gray joggers, and a pair of beat-up sneakers that had clearly survived considerable mileage. He carried a worn leather duffel bag over one shoulder. He was large, broad through the chest and shoulders, the kind of build that made people unconsciously give him space in lines. He had a short, well-groomed beard and dark eyes that were calm in the way deep water is calm, not still, just deep. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, a young man named Jordan, who had been working this gate for months and had never once seen this passenger come through it. He moved down the jet bridge without hurrying. He had been traveling for many hours. He had meetings in London that could not wait. He wanted to sleep. That was all he wanted. He did not know yet what was waiting for him in seat 1A. Vanessa Harrington did not walk through airports. She processed through them. There was a difference, and it was visible in every detail of her movement. The way her heels struck the floor with a rhythm that sounded like punctuation. The way her oversized sunglasses stayed on indoors. The way she held her boarding pass between 2 fingers like it was something slightly beneath her to be carrying personally. She was a woman who had spent considerable time and more considerable money ensuring that age was something that happened to other people. Her face was smooth in the particular way of faces that have been assisted, not unpleasant, but slightly removed from the natural order of aging, the way an excellent restoration looks almost real. Her coat was vintage Dior. Her jewelry was real. Her handbag was the kind with a waiting list. She had married Carlton Harrington many years ago in a ceremony that cost more than most families earned in a decade. And in those years, she had moved from a lower middle class upbringing in Ohio, a fact she had entirely erased from her personal biography, to a life of extraordinary privilege and absolutely no accountability. She was flying to London alone. Carlton was in meetings all week. The charity gala she was attending, an event for underprivileged children, the irony of which she felt absolutely nothing about, was on Thursday evening. She had the whole week to herself: a suite at Claridge's, fittings at 3 different ateliers, lunch with women whose last names opened doors. She had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. She boarded flight 619 in a mood that could generously be described as barely contained impatience. Elena Rivera, the lead flight attendant, professional to her marrow with the kind of warm precision that takes years to develop, met her at the cabin door with the practiced smile that Summit staff wear, like a second uniform. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington. Welcome aboard. May I take your coat?" Vanessa did not look at her. She thrust the coat in Elena's direction without breaking stride. "Krug, not that sparkling vinegar you people served me last month, actual Krug. And hang the coat. Do not fold it. If I see a single crease when I land, I will be contacting your HR department personally." "Of course, Mrs. Harrington, right away." Elena took the coat with the careful hands of someone diffusing something fragile. She had been briefed on seat 1A before boarding. The manifest had flagged Mrs. Harrington as a VIP passenger, which in the private shorthand of flight crews carried 2 possible meanings. The first meaning was the ordinary one. The second meaning was the real one. Vanessa settled into seat 1A, with the proprietary satisfaction of someone taking possession of something they owned. The seat was perfect, of course it was. She had demanded it be perfect, and the cabin was nearly empty. A few passengers scattered in the rows behind her, most of them already opening laptops or pulling out books. Nobody in 1B, nobody beside her. She allowed herself a breath of genuine pleasure. She pulled out her phone and began typing to her assistant about the Claridge's reservation, the window orientation of her suite, the unacceptable fact that the hotel had suggested she might consider a different room for one of the nights due to a private event. She was mid-sentence on her third message when the shadow fell across the aisle. She looked up expecting Elena with her champagne. What she saw was a large man in a navy hoodie moving unhurried down the aisle, checking his ticket, reaching for the overhead bin, settling into seat 1B like he had every reason in the world to be there, which he did. Vanessa's thumb stopped over her phone screen. She stared. The reaction that moved through her was not conscious. It preceded thought, preceded language. It was something older and uglier than either: a rejection, a refusal, the deep, grinding certainty that this was wrong, that this was an error, that this needed to be corrected immediately. She hit the call button once, twice, 3 times, and the flight that would change everything had begun. His name was Darius Langston. He was a man who had been building something his entire life and had the quiet, settled confidence that comes from knowing your work is real and your hands made it. He was broad through the chest and shoulders in the way of someone who had played college football on a partial academic scholarship and had never entirely stopped training, though the training now looked different. Early mornings, discipline, the body as instrument rather than performance. His hands were large, with the faint calluses at the base of his fingers that came not from physical labor, but from years of gripping pens, phones, steering wheels, the edges of desks at late hours when the math did not work, and he had to find a way to make it work. His beard was short and precise. His eyes were the particular dark brown of deep water, not still, just deep, with the kind of patience in them that is not passive but chosen, maintained, practiced every single day against every reason to let it go. He looked tired. He had been traveling across multiple time zones. He had a board meeting in London that could not wait. He needed to sleep. He needed silence and a flat surface and the absence of anyone needing something from him. He pulled off his duffel bag and lifted it into the overhead compartment with the easy strength of someone who has done this thousands of times. He sat down in 1B. He let out a slow breath, the breath of a man who has been holding himself together across oceans and can finally, briefly stop. He reached into the seat pocket in front of him, pulled out his phone almost without thinking, the way you check your mirrors before you pull out of a driveway, the way a habit lives in the body without occupying the mind. He pressed the side button twice. A small red recording dot appeared in the upper corner of the screen. He tucked the phone back into the seat pocket, angled slightly outward, the lens unobtrusive. He had developed this habit years ago, not out of paranoia, but out of something more practical and more painful than paranoia: documentation, the quiet, unglamorous discipline of a man who had learned early that in certain rooms his word would never be enough on its own, and who had decided, not bitterly, just practically, to make sure he always had something more. He plugged in his cheap wired earphones, found a playlist he had been building for months, and closed his eyes. He was almost asleep when he heard the call button once, twice, 3 times fast. He opened his eyes. Elena Rivera arrived at row 1 with the champagne flute balanced on a tray, her smile in place. Her read of the situation already complete before she reached the seat. She had the particular situational awareness of someone who has spent years in enclosed spaces, managing the full range of human behavior at altitude. She could assess a passenger's emotional state from the way they held their shoulders before she was close enough to hear their voice. She was close enough now. Take it away. Elena's smile did not waver. I'm sorry. Vanessa gestured sharply at Darius, who had opened his eyes and was watching the exchange with the careful stillness of someone who knows what is coming. This is wrong. This person does not belong here. There has been some kind of error. I need you to escort him to the correct section. Elena glanced at Darius, then back to Vanessa. Mrs. Harrington, this is Mr. Langston. He's booked in seat 1B. He's in the correct seat. Impossible. Look at him. The word landed in the space between them, and neither of them pretended it had not. Elena kept her expression professional. Her jaw had tightened by perhaps 2 millimeters. I understand your concern, Mrs. Harrington, but Mr. Langston has a valid ticket for seat 1B. The flight is fully booked. I am not able to move him, and I'm afraid our private suites are occupied. I paid $12,000 for this pod. Yes, and Mr. Langston paid for his. Elena kept her voice level. Is there anything else I can get for you? Do you know who my husband is? I know you are our guest, Mrs. Harrington, and I want your flight to be comfortable. Carlton Harrington. He manages $2 billion. He plays squash with people who own airlines. One phone call from him, and you will be serving peanuts in economy for the rest of your career. Are we understanding each other? Elena absorbed this, kept her smile. I understand. Is there anything else? If you won't do your job, she said, dropping her voice to a hiss, I will handle it myself. Elena retreated to the galley. Her hands were not shaking, but they wanted to. In the galley doorway, Maya Santos stood with the controlled stillness of someone trying not to draw attention to what she was doing. She was the junior flight attendant, and she had a habit, a good one. She had always privately believed of picking up her phone when something felt wrong. Something felt very wrong. She had been watching since Vanessa boarded. She had watched the coat thrusting, the champagne demand, the dismissal of Elena. She had watched Vanessa freeze when Darius sat down. She had watched the call button hit 3 times in quick succession. She had watched Vanessa's face as she spoke, and she had seen in it something that went beyond ordinary rudeness into a different territory entirely. She turned her phone over in her hand, opened the camera, pressed record. She did not announce it. She did not point the lens dramatically. She simply held it at her side, angled toward the front of the cabin, and watched. Vanessa turned in her seat. She angled her body toward Darius with the deliberateness of someone who has decided that a direct approach is the only remaining option. She had been dismissed by the flight attendant. She was not going to be dismissed by the man in the hoodie. Excuse me, she said, loud, performative, wanting an audience. Darius had both earbuds in. He did not react. Excuse me, louder. Darius slowly pulled one earbud out. He turned his head. His eyes met hers. They were calm, dark, completely unreadable. Yes, he said. His voice was deep, a baritone that resonated in the small space between them with the weight of someone who had used it in boardrooms and courtrooms and conversations that mattered. One syllable, and the word took up the whole row. You are in my space, Vanessa said. Darius looked at the partition between them, the substantial, very clearly defined physical barrier that separated seat 1A from seat 1B. He looked back at her. I don't think so. I'm in my seat. How did you get this seat? Vanessa crossed her arms. Her voice had the particular edge of someone who has decided that volume is the same as authority. Did you steal a credit card? Is this some kind of charity program that Summit is running? Some kind of equity initiative? In the seat behind her, Brody Sinclair, a tech entrepreneur from San Francisco who had made his first 100 million before he was 35, and who had in the process sat in enough rooms with enough powerful people to recognize a specific kind of ugliness when he saw it, closed his laptop. He lowered it. He watched. Darius looked at Vanessa. Not with anger, not with defensiveness. He looked at her the way you look at something you have seen before, something you know the shape of, something that is tedious in its familiarity, even as it costs you something to sit through. I bought the ticket, Darius said. Same as you. He let that sit for a moment. I've had a long week. I'd like to rest. He put the earbud back in. Vanessa stared at him. She had been dismissed, gently, calmly, entirely dismissed, not with hostility, not with confrontation, but with the quiet finality of someone who has decided she is not worth his energy. The rage that moved through her was white and total. This was not over. In the galley, Elena had found Derek Langford, the purser. Derek was a veteran of long-haul aviation, a man who had seen everything and maintained his professionalism through all of it, with the consistency of someone who took the word professional seriously. He listened to Elena's account of the exchange at row 1 with his arms folded and his expression carefully neutral. She called him, Elena started. I heard, Derek said. His voice was even. He checked the manifest on his tablet. His eyes moved over something. They stopped. Something passed across his face, a flicker, quickly controlled. He looked at Elena. Handle it by the book. Keep everything documented and keep Maya close. Why Maya specifically? Derek looked back at the manifest. Just keep her close. He paused. And Elena, whatever happens up there, you've done nothing wrong. Remember that. Elena did not understand the last part. She filed it away and went back to work. For 40 minutes, the cabin held an uneasy peace. The lights had been dimmed for the Atlantic crossing. Most passengers in rows 2 through 6 had reclined their seats, opened their blankets, begun the work of making peace with 7 hours in a metal tube at altitude. The engines hummed their white noise lullaby. The air had the faint, cool scent of recycled oxygen and expensive leather. In seat 1B, Darius appeared to be asleep. His seat reclined, the duvet pulled to his chest, his breathing slow and even. In seat 1A, Vanessa was not asleep. She had gone through the Krug and switched to red wine, and now she was on her 3rd glass of that, and the alcohol had done what alcohol does to people whose emotional regulation is primarily external. It had removed the thin membrane between what she thought and what she said, between what she wanted to do and what she allowed herself to do. She watched Darius sleep. His peace infuriated her. The ease of him, the way he occupied space without apology, the way he had dismissed her without raising his voice, without drama, without giving her the confrontation she needed to feel right about what she was feeling. He had simply continued as if she were not a threat, as if she were not someone whose disapproval mattered. She ordered a 4th glass. Derek delivered it with flat, professional eyes and no comment. He looked at the glass in her hand, at the empty ones on her tray, and said nothing. He noted it on his incident log. He went back to the galley. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, mild, brief. A bump and a small shudder through the airframe, the kind of thing that experienced flyers do not bother to look up for. Vanessa stood up. Before we go any further, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And have you ever been judged the moment you walked into a room? Tell us your story. She used the turbulence. She had decided to use it several minutes before it arrived, and when it came, that small convenient shudder, she was ready. She stood, used the motion as cover, and the remainder of her red wine, a full glass, deep burgundy, cold, swung in a wide arc and came down across Darius's chest and left arm. The liquid soaked through the hoodie instantly, through to his skin. Darius came awake the way people who sleep lightly come awake, completely, immediately. No groggy middle ground. He sat up. The cold wine pressed against his chest. He looked at it. He looked up at her. Vanessa stood over him, swaying slightly, her expression arranged into something she intended to look like surprise. "Oops," she said. Her voice had that particular quality of someone performing innocence for an audience they know is watching. She did not reach for a napkin. She did not move to help. She just stood there. Maybe if you weren't sprawling all over the cabin, that wouldn't have happened. Darius looked at the stains spreading across his hoodie. Then he looked back at her. His voice was quiet, quieter than the situation seemed to call for, which somehow made it louder. "You did that on purpose." Vanessa laughed, not a real laugh, a performance of dismissal. "Don't be ridiculous. Honestly, that hoodie was garbage anyway. Consider it a favor. Now you have an excuse to throw it away." Darius pressed the call button once. Elena appeared within 30 seconds. "Mr. Langston, is everything okay?" "Some club soda and a towel, please," Darius said. His voice was controlled, tight at the edges. "And perhaps you could ask this passenger to return to her seat." He did not point at Vanessa. He did not look at her. When he said it, he was not going to give her the dignity of his attention. "I can stand wherever I want," Vanessa announced. She turned to address the cabin, arms spread slightly, as if inviting agreement. "This is a free country, or is this international airspace? Either way, I don't take orders from service staff." "Mrs. Harrington, the seatbelt sign is on," Elena said. "Please bring me the purser," Vanessa said, cutting her off. "I want to file a formal complaint against him." She pointed at Darius. "He threatened me." The cabin went quiet. The rustling and soft clicking of tablets and laptops stopped. In seat 2A, Brody Sinclair had his laptop closed now. He was watching openly. In seat 3A, Eleanor Voss, a woman with white hair and reading glasses low on her nose, looked up from her hardback book. Darius stood up. He was large in the narrow aisle. For 1/2 second, Vanessa stepped back. A reflex, a flash of something she did not want to examine. But Darius simply stepped into the aisle to give Elena access to clean the seat. He looked at Vanessa. "I did not threaten you," he said. His voice carried in the quiet cabin without effort. "I am asking you politely to leave me alone. You have been harassing me since I sat down." "Harassing you?" Vanessa laughed again, and this time the laugh had an edge of something genuinely unhinged in it, the particular pitch of someone who has had too much to drink and too little self-awareness in the same evening. "I am a Harrington. We don't harass people like you. We employ people like you. We fire people like you." She looked him up and down. "I bet you're a dealer. That is the only way someone like you has cash for a ticket like this." Brody Sinclair spoke. His voice was calm. "Hey, that's enough. Sit down and shut up." Vanessa spun. "Excuse me?" "Nobody cares who you are," Brody said. "You're drunk and you're being a racist. Sit down." Vanessa's face went red, then redder. The world was inverting on her. The wealthy man in 2A was supposed to be on her side. They were the same class, the same world. Why was he defending the man in the hoodie? Why was nobody... At that moment, deep in the cabin of Darius's memory, a door opened. He was 19 years old. He had never been on a plane before. The scholarship letter had arrived on a Thursday in a plain envelope that his mother had propped against the fruit bowl in their kitchen. She had not opened it. She was superstitious about other people's letters, and also she had needed to sit down before she was ready to find out what it said. Darius had come home from his afternoon shift at the hardware store still in his work clothes and seen the envelope and opened it, standing in the kitchen while his mother watched from the doorway. Full academic scholarship. He had worn his best clothes on the flight, a pressed white shirt, his father's tie. His father had been dead for years, but the tie was real silk and Darius had kept it folded in tissue paper. Dark slacks, his good shoes. He wanted to look like someone who belonged in the world he was entering. He had saved for the ticket from his hardware store wages, economy class, middle seat, which was fine. He had a window seat in his mind. The woman in the aisle seat had looked at him when he arrived at the row. She had taken in the pressed shirt, the good shoes. She had looked away. She had pressed the call button. When the flight attendant came, she had leaned over and said quietly, but not quietly enough, "I'm not comfortable. Is there another seat available?" The flight attendant had apologized. She had found the woman another seat. She had not said anything to Darius. She had just smiled at him, a brief, tight, noncommittal smile, and moved on. Darius had sat alone in those 3 seats for the entire flight. He had told himself he did not care. He was 19, and he was going to college on a full scholarship, and he was wearing his father's tie, and he was going to build something. He told himself he did not care. He cared. He cared so much that it sat in his chest for the full flight like a stone. Not the woman's words. He had heard words like that before. He knew the shape of them. But the flight attendant's smile. The way that smile had said, "I see this. I'm sorry. I cannot help you. Good luck." That night, in a dormitory room that smelled of fresh paint and someone else's air freshener, Darius Langston opened a yellow legal pad and wrote 4 words at the top of the first page. An airline for everyone. He stared at it for a long time. Then he went to sleep. That legal pad was framed on the wall of his private office at Summit Airlines headquarters. He had never told anyone why. His executive team had asked. The framing seemed incongruous next to the industry awards and the Forbes covers. He always said it was a personal reminder. He never said of what. The memory did not come gently. It arrived the way certain memories do, with the weight of something that shaped you without asking permission. Darius was 31 years old. He had been running a small regional carrier for 2 years, 2 planes and 12 employees, and he had flown to Dallas for a banking conference. He was pitching for a $40 million expansion loan. He had prepared for 6 weeks. He wore his best suit, charcoal gray, good fabric, the suit he had bought specifically for rooms like this one. He was the only black man in the conference room. The bank president shook hands with every person who entered. He shook the hand of the man before Darius. He shook the hand of the man after Darius. He did not extend his hand to Darius, not an obvious snub, not a deliberate slight. Or maybe it was, and maybe the deniability was the point. Darius had stood there for a half second with his hand ready and then lowered it and found his seat. During the pitch, a board member in the 3rd row had raised his hand and said, not unkindly, but with complete certainty, "Son, who are you representing? Which of the carriers sent you?" Darius had looked at him. "I represent myself," he said. "I own the company." The board member had laughed, not viciously, just the way you laugh when someone says something that does not compute. A reflex, quick and careless and devastating. "Of course you do," he had said. Darius did not get the loan. He had driven back to his hotel in a rental car on a freeway at night, the radio on. He had not cried, had not raged, had not called anyone. He had sat on the edge of the hotel bed and been quiet for exactly 1 hour. Then he had called his mother. She had said, "Baby, you are not building this for them. You are building it for every child who will never be laughed at in that room because you already walked through it." He had gotten the funding from a different bank. 3 years later, he had sent the first bank president a framed copy of Summit Airlines' first Forbes cover. No note, just the cover. That memory lived in his shoulders now, the posture of someone who has carried doubt and refused to let it bend him. Back in the present, in seat 1B, Darius wiped the wine from his sleeve. His expression was calm. His jaw was set. He had been here before. He knew exactly where this was going, and he knew with the bone-deep certainty of someone who has spent his life being patient. Not because patience comes easily, but because he has chosen it over and over as an act of deliberate character. That the only thing that mattered now was not becoming what she needed him to be. Derek arrived at row 1. He looked at Vanessa with the professional assessment of someone who had been reading passengers for decades and could grade their level of difficulty with one glance. His grade on Vanessa Harrington right now was serious. "Mrs. Harrington, what seems to be the issue?" "He threatened me," Vanessa said. "He grabbed my arm when I walked past. I want him removed now." Derek looked at Darius. Darius said nothing. He simply tilted the phone in the seat pocket a fraction, just enough for Derek to see the small red dot in the upper corner of the screen. Derek registered this. His face did not change. "I'll look into it," Derek said. "Mrs. Harrington, I need you to return to your seat." "You're protecting him." Vanessa's voice had the dangerous, slurring edge of someone who has moved past the pleasant phase of intoxication. "You're all protecting him. I know what this is. He's a friend of the crew. He's a diversity plant. He's not a real passenger." He's on my flight, Derek said simply. As are you, and I am asking both of you to please. Brody Sinclair leaned into the aisle. Lady, seriously, stop talking. Every word you say is going to cost you. I don't take instruction from strangers, Vanessa snapped. Brody spread his hands. Good luck with that strategy. My husband Carlton Harrington manages $2 billion, Vanessa announced, looking around the cabin as if surveying a courtroom. He plays squash every Sunday with the man who owns this airline. When I tell him what his so-called employees have allowed to happen to me today, he will end careers. Not transfer, not demote. End. She turned back to Darius. The word she said next was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was contemptuous, quiet, the tone of someone who has decided that volume is unnecessary because they have already established their hierarchy. I would be very careful, she said, about who you pretend to be. Darius looked at her for a long moment. I highly doubt Carlton Harrington will be making any calls on your behalf today. Vanessa blinked. Why? Because you know him? No, Darius said, because I've never played squash with anyone named Carlton Harrington. The sentence was odd, the phrasing was specific. She stared at him. The alcohol made her brain slow. She turned it over, looking at it from different angles, and could not find the shape of what it meant. She looked away. She sat back down. She ordered another drink. Derek stood in the galley with his tablet in one hand and his jaw set in the particular way of a man who is keeping a very specific kind of calm. Elena stood beside him, her own hands wrapped around a cold bottle of water she was not drinking. She called him, Elena started again. I know what she called him, Derek said. Are we going to escalate? Derek looked at his tablet, at the manifest, at the name in seat 1B. He set the tablet down. He looked at the ceiling of the galley for one moment, the look of a man who is doing a very fast calculation involving duty, protocol, and the specific situation he finds himself in. We document everything, he said, every interaction, every word, every timestamp. We follow procedure. We do not escalate unless she escalates further. He paused. And Maya, she nodded toward the galley door. Maya's already on it. Good, Derek said, good. Eleanor Voss had returned to her book, or more precisely, she held her book at the angle that indicated reading while she thought about something else entirely. She had been a federal judge for many years. She had presided over cases involving crimes that ranged from the banal to the genuinely evil. And in those years, she had developed a finely calibrated instrument for detecting when something was going to become consequential, when something that looked like it might resolve itself was not actually going to resolve itself. That instrument was active now. It had been active since Vanessa Harrington had said the word thug in a voice designed to carry. She turned a page she had not read. She watched the front of the cabin over her reading glasses. She waited. The hour that followed was the kind of quiet that is worse than noise. The dimmed cabin, the engine hum, the other passengers in rows 2 through 6 slowly returning to their screens and their sleep, the way people return to normalcy, because the alternative, staying on alert, staying engaged with someone else's crisis, is exhausting, and most people are not built for sustained witnessing. Vanessa drank. She sat in the perfect luxury of her $12,000 pod and she drank and she watched Darius in seat 1B and she felt the rage building in her chest like water behind a dam. He was asleep again. Actually asleep, or appearing to be? She could not tell. And the inability to tell infuriated her further. His breathing was slow, his face was relaxed. He had reclined the seat, pulled the Summit branded duvet over himself, and settled into the kind of genuine, untroubled sleep that requires a completely clear conscience. How dare he? How dare he be comfortable? How dare he rest in the seat she needed to be empty, needed to be occupied by someone appropriate, needed to stop existing as proof that the world she had constructed for herself was not as solid as she required it to be. She looked at his hoodie, at the worn sneakers tucked under the seat, at the old phone in the seat pocket with its screen angled outward. Something about that phone nagged at her, something about the way he had positioned it. But the wine was warm in her blood, and the thought slipped before she could hold it. She looked at the window. The Atlantic was black beneath them. No landmarks, no lights, just the dark of open ocean, 38,000 feet below. There was nobody out here, just the people in this cabin. and she was the most important person in this cabin. She pressed the call button. Nobody came immediately. She pressed it again. When Elena appeared, Vanessa said, "Another wine." "Mrs. Harrington," Elena said, "Derek asked me to inform you that we recommend—" "Another wine," Vanessa said, "now." Elena brought the wine. Her hands were steady. Her expression was professional. She had been trained for this. She had been trained for exactly this. But training for something and living through it are different things. And Elena Rivera was young, and she had been awake for many hours, and she was tired in a way that went beyond fatigue, into something more personal. She brought the wine. She went back to the galley. She stood next to the coffee machine and looked at the wall and breathed. In the galley doorway, Maya was still filming, the red dot in the corner of her screen, the view count climbing. She had not gone live yet. She was documenting. When she went live and she was increasingly certain she was going to go live, she would have hours of footage to work with. She watched the clock. She watched Vanessa's glass. She waited. 2 hours before landing, the cabin had entered the deeper dark of mid-flight, that quiet plateau where the flight attendants move like shadows and the only sounds are engines and breathing. Darius got up to use the lavatory. He moved through the cabin with the easy, unhurried movement of someone comfortable in their body, stepping around the footrest of the adjacent seat without thinking about it. He was gone 3 minutes. When he returned to row 1, Vanessa was standing in the aisle, blocking the way back to his seat. Not directly. She had positioned herself at just the angle that required him to either ask her to move or brush past her. He stepped around her, did not touch her, did not speak. She followed him, stood over him as he settled back into 1B. He looked up at her. "You think you've won something?" she said. Her voice was low and steady, which was worse than if it had been loud. The wine had burned away the last layer of pretense. This was Vanessa Harrington without the social coding, the bare exposed core of what lived under the Dior and the diamonds. "You think because some tech guy in 2A speaks up for you that means you belong here? You don't. People like you—" She stopped as if tasting the next words before she said them, as if deciding they were worth the cost. "You're nothing. You're dirt. You're street trash. Say something. Go ahead. Prove me right." Darius looked at her. The quiet in him was enormous. "I already have everything I need from this conversation," he said. She did not understand what that meant. She took it as dismissal. The rage peaked, found its edge, and went past it. She drew back her head. She looked into his eyes and she spat. The cabin froze. He did not move. The spit tracked slowly down his left cheek, and Darius Langston sat perfectly, completely still. And for 5 full seconds, he made no sound, made no gesture, made no movement of any kind. He did not wipe it away. He did not react. He sat in the stillness he had chosen over and over his whole life. Every time the cost of that choice had been this high or higher, his father's voice lived in these moments, specific and clear, the way the voices of people we have lost tend to be clearest when we need them most. Darius Sr. had been a man who drove a taxi for decades in Atlanta, who had been called names through the window of his own car, who had been underpaid and overlooked and occasionally threatened, and who had raised his son with one piece of guidance that he repeated so often it had become something structural, something load-bearing in the architecture of who Darius Langston was. The way a man responds when he's disrespected tells the world everything about who he is. Not the man who disrespects him. 5 seconds. An eternity in that silence. Then Darius raised his hand. He wiped the spit from his cheek with the back of his thumb. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Vanessa Harrington, who was standing over him with her chest heaving and her eyes wild and her hands trembling with the specific trembling of someone who has crossed a line they cannot see back from. Then he looked toward the galley. "Derek," he said. His voice was level as a horizon. No shout, no crack, no performance. Just a man who knows exactly what he is going to do next. Derek appeared in the galley doorway instantly. He had been watching. They had all been watching. "Radio Heathrow," Darius said. "I want police at the gate. Assault and battery, racially aggravated harassment, interference with flight crew." "You can't do that," Vanessa said. Her voice had lost its certainty. "It's my word against yours." Darius reached into the seat pocket. He pulled out his phone. He turned the screen toward her, and she saw herself in 4K, perfectly framed, perfectly lit by the first-class cabin lights, every word audible, every gesture documented. The wine spill reconstructed in high resolution. And at the end of the recording, in real time, the moment she drew back and the moment she spat. Actually, Darius said, it's your word against mine and everything you just recorded yourself doing. Vanessa's knees gave. She grabbed the headrest of 1A. The blood had left her face so completely that the foundation on her skin looked theatrical, a mask on a mask. Brody Sinclair stood up from seat 2A. I'm a witness. I saw the whole thing. Every word since she boarded. Eleanor Voss lowered her book to her lap. She looked over her reading glasses. As am I. Maya Sanos stepped out of the galley. Her phone was in her hand and she turned the screen toward the cabin so that anyone who looked could see she was live. The viewer count in the top corner of the screen read 8,247 and was climbing with the speed of a pot coming to boil. And about 8,000 people on Instagram just watched it happen, Maya said. Her voice was remarkably steady for someone who was shaking everywhere else. And they're all still here. Vanessa spun toward her. You filmed me. That is illegal. You had no right. Public space, Maya said. No expectation of privacy. She looked at the viewer count. Now it's 9,000 and they can all hear you. Vanessa looked at the phone, at the numbers climbing, at the comments scrolling so fast they were illegible. Just a wall of text pouring in from people who had been watching the last 3 hours from the outside, from the safety of their own homes and offices, and were now watching Vanessa Harrington understand in real time that she had been seen. She tried 3 things in rapid succession. The first was money. She turned to Darius. She had composed herself into something resembling negotiation. Whatever you want, she said. Whatever number. I will write you a check right now. 50,000. She watched his face. 100, 200. Just delete the video and we can resolve this like adults. Darius looked at her. I don't need your money. Vanessa made a sound that was almost a laugh. Oh, please. Everyone needs money. I bought this plane in cash, Darius said. That stopped her. Not because she believed it, she did not yet, but because of how he said it. Not with pride, not with performance, just as information. The way you state a fact that does not require defense. You're lying, Darius said. Nothing more. The second thing she tried was the victim narrative. Derek, she called, her voice pivoting into distress with the speed of someone who has done this before. He grabbed my arm when I walked by earlier. Before any of this, he's been aggressive toward me this whole flight. I have been in fear for my safety. Derek looked at her. Then he looked at the phone in Darius's lap, which was still recording. Then he looked back at her. Mrs. Harrington, I need you to return to your seat now. I am filing a formal... Now, Derek said. And for the first time in 7 hours, his professional calm had acquired an edge. The third thing she tried was Carlton. My husband will dismantle this airline, she announced to the cabin, turning in a slow circle as if addressing a jury. One phone call. Carlton Harrington, you'll all be filing for unemployment by Monday, every one of you. Brody looked up from his phone. He had been reading the comments on Maya's live stream, his expression moving through phases of confirmation and dismay. From what I'm reading in here, he said, you might want to worry about your own Monday first. Vanessa turned to him. What is that supposed to mean? Brody just showed her his phone screen, the comments, the shares, the tagged posts and reposts. Her face clearly visible, clearly identifiable, already being matched to her name by the crowd-sourced machinery of social media. In the galley, Maya narrated quietly for her audience while Elena stood beside her, watching row 1 with the expression of someone witnessing a natural disaster from a safe distance. We are at 38,000 feet, Maya said into the phone, her voice measured and clear. This woman has called this man a thug. She has poured wine on him. She has filed a false complaint. She has just committed assault. And he has not raised his voice once, not once in 3 hours. The viewer count, 18,400. 30 seconds later, 26,000. Then a verified travel journalist with millions of followers posted, this is happening live on Summit Airlines Flight 619, first-class cabin. Staff are doing their jobs. The man being assaulted has not reacted once. The shares compounded. The algorithm found its footing. Within minutes, the hashtag Summit Flight 619 was trending in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada simultaneously. The viewer count on Maya's stream, 41,000. Comments moved too fast to read individually, but the tone was a wave, a massive rolling wave of outrage and recognition, and something else. Something harder to name, something that looked like the collective breath of people who had been waiting to see this particular scene end differently. He never raised his voice, that strength. Who is this woman? Someone find her name. I've never flown Summit before, but I'm booking tomorrow. The flight attendant is shaking and she's still doing her job. Give her a raise immediately. Derek applied the flex cuffs with the practiced efficiency of someone following procedure. Firm, correct, no commentary. Vanessa screamed. The word kidnapping left her mouth 3 times, then the word lawsuit. Then Carlton's name again, as if repetition would summon him. Derek said nothing. He documented everything. Darius had moved to the galley jump seat. He sat with an ice pack from the first aid kit against his cheek, his elbows on his knees, his head slightly bowed. Not in defeat, in the particular posture of a man who is very, very tired and has decided that this is the right moment to be honest about that. Elena brought him water. She set it on the counter beside him and could not find any words that were adequate to the situation. So she just stood there for a moment and then said quietly, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Langston. I should have done more earlier." "You did your job perfectly," Darius said. He looked up at her. "This is not on you." She was going to say something and then stopped. She said instead, her husband knows the owner of the airline. "Carlton Harrington," Darius said. Elena blinked. "You know him." Darius set the ice pack down. He looked at the galley wall. "Carlton Harrington has been running a short-selling strategy against Summit stock for months. He's been betting publicly and loudly that this airline is going to fail. He has 60% of his firm's assets tied to that bet." Elena stared at him. "So she is married to the man who's trying to bankrupt us," Darius said. "Yes." He picked the ice pack back up. "And she just handed me everything I need to finish that conversation." Elena opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mr. Langston." "Darius," he said. "Tonight, just Darius." She nodded. She went back to work. Eleanor Voss left her seat. She moved through the dimmed cabin with the unhurried authority of someone who has never had to negotiate her right to take up space. She came to the galley. She looked at Darius. He looked back at her. "I'm Eleanor," she said. "Darius," he said. "I know who you are," she said it simply, as if the information had always been available and she had simply been waiting for an appropriate moment to use it. "I've known since about 20 minutes into the flight." She paused. "I did not say anything because I did not think you needed saving." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "I want to give a witness statement," she said, "in writing under oath, everything from boarding to this moment." She pulled out a card from her cardigan pocket, a small plain card, and held it out to him. "My lawyer can contact yours." Darius took the card. He turned it over. He saw the title printed beneath her name, the many years of federal bench distilled into 8 words. And something passed across his face that was not surprise. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You handled this with more grace than I have seen in 2 decades of watching people handle impossible situations," she said. "I wanted you to know that someone witnessed it who understands exactly what it cost." She went back to her seat. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into London Heathrow. At this time, please return to your seats. Upon arrival, please remain seated until further notice from ground staff. We thank you very much for your patience." In seat 1A, Vanessa sat with her wrists cuffed, staring at the clouds beginning to appear below the window. The wine had burned to a headache behind her eyes. The adrenaline was fading. "Carlton will fix this," she told herself. "He always fixes things." She looked at the flex cuffs, at the wine stain on her Dior coat, at the phone in Maya's hand and the number she could see even from this distance. The scrolling wall of comments from people she would never meet who had watched her become the worst version of herself at altitude. Carlton will fix this. She believed it. She had to believe it. At this point in the story, what would you have done? If you were in that cabin, would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Tell us in the comments below. The plane did not pull to a gate. It stopped on a remote stand away from the terminal in the kind of gray London morning that looked like the sky had been considering rain for several hours and had finally committed. Through the rain-streaked oval of the first-class window, Vanessa could see them. 3 Metropolitan Police vehicles, their blue lights cutting clean circles in the mist. A black Range Rover with tinted windows parked 50 meters back. Men in high-visibility jackets. A woman in a dark suit walking with purpose toward the aircraft stairs. Vanessa looked at the police cars, looked at the lights, counted them. Why are we stopping here? Her voice had a new quality in it. The performance had gone out of it. This was a real question, a frightened one. Derek stood at the front of the cabin. Please processing, remote stand. Vanessa looked at him. This is for criminals. Derek looked back at her. Yes, he said. The cabin door opened. The cold, damp air of Heathrow came in, and with it came 3 officers from the Metropolitan Police in their high-visibility jackets and the particular expression of British law enforcement, which is not aggressive but is absolutely immovable. Behind them walked a man in a dark suit, James Webb, Darius's head of security in London, who had flown out from Summit's UK operations office that morning when Derek's incident report had come through the internal system. James did not look at Vanessa, he looked at Darius. The lead officer, Detective Inspector Claire Moss, with gray-streaked hair pulled back, and the kind of eyes that have processed a great deal without forgetting any of it, walked the length of the first-class cabin with complete authority. She stopped at seat 1A. Mrs. Vanessa Harrington, I want my lawyer, Vanessa said. Her voice was smaller than she intended. I'm an American citizen, and I demand... We have full jurisdiction over crimes committed on aircraft landing in the United Kingdom. Mrs. Harrington? Moss's voice was even and unhurried. You are under arrest for common assault and racially aggravated harassment under the Public Order Act. You are also being detained pending further questioning regarding threats made to airline staff and interference with the operation of a commercial aircraft. Vanessa looked toward the galley. Darius was not there. He had moved. She could not see him. Racially aggravated, she said. The phrase seemed to confuse her, as if it were being applied to someone else. I'm not... Derek stood aside. James Webb held the curtain, and Darius Langston stepped out of the galley and into the first-class cabin. He had changed nothing. Still the navy hoodie, still the worn sneakers, his duffel bag over his shoulder, ready to deplane. The ice pack was gone, but the mark on his cheek was still there, faint and real. He stood in the aisle and looked at Vanessa Harrington. She looked at him. Something shifted in the cabin. The air itself seemed to recalibrate. Moss looked between them, and then she said what needed to be said. What, Mrs. Harrington? That man is Darius Langston. Vanessa blinked. And he does not have a seat on this airline. Moss's voice was steady. He owns it. He built Summit Airlines from the ground up. Every seat on this plane, every uniform in this cabin, the champagne you poured out, the lounge you were going to walk into at Heathrow, the gate staff who were going to greet you, all of it. She paused. All his. Vanessa Harrington stared at Darius Langston. The sound in the cabin was nothing. Not silence exactly. The engines were still cycling down, the climate system was still running. Maya's phone was still live, and 41,000 people were watching. But the human sound had stopped completely. Brody had stopped moving, Eleanor had stopped breathing. Elena, watching from the galley doorway, had her hand over her mouth. Vanessa's face moved through several expressions too fast for any of them to be named individually. Denial first, the reflexive, protective denial of someone whose entire worldview is being directly challenged. Then something that was almost understanding, but too frightened to fully arrive. Then just blankness. The look of a person whose internal software has encountered something it has no protocol for. That's not... You can't... Her voice stopped. She looked at his hoodie, his worn shoes, the battered leather duffel bag, the old phone with the cheap wired earphones still wrapped around it. You don't look like... she said. And then she stopped again because she heard herself. Because even she, even now, at this altitude of self-inflicted disaster, was capable of hearing what those words sounded like when said out loud. Like what? Darius said. It was a quiet question, not a trap, not an accusation, just a question. simple and honest and devastating in its simplicity. Vanessa had no answer. The sentence had no end that would not indict her more completely than anything she had already done. She looked for the end of it and found only the beginning of everything that was wrong with how she had seen him from the moment his shadow fell across the aisle. Brody Sinclair from seat 2A said, "There it is." His voice was not triumphant. It was the voice of someone naming something accurately and without pleasure. "There it is. That is the whole thing right there. You don't look like." That is what this was always about. Not the seat, not the ticket, not any of it. Just, he does not look like what she decided he should look like. Maya said nothing. She turned her phone slowly from Vanessa's face to Darius's. She let 41,000 people draw their own conclusions. The comments were a wall of text moving too fast to read. But the collective temperature of them was unmistakable, not gloating, something more like reckoning, the sound of a very large number of people watching something true happen in real time. The officers guided Vanessa Harrington to her feet. She did not resist. The fight had gone out of her, not gradually the way a fire dies in stages, but all at once like a light switching off. She stood in the aisle with the flex cuffs still on her wrists, and she looked smaller than she had at any point in the previous 7 hours. The Dior coat was wrinkled. The jewelry was still real, but the authority she had worn like a second skin had simply left. As they guided her toward the cabin door, she passed the row where Darius stood. She stopped. The officers gave her 2 seconds, 3. She looked at him. For a moment it seemed like she might say something. Her mouth opened. The cabin waited. Nothing came. The officer touched her arm gently but with finality. They moved toward the door. In the cabin behind her, something happened that none of the flight crew had orchestrated and none of the passengers had planned. The woman in seat 4C, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who had been on her way to visit her daughter in London and who had spent the last 3 hours increasingly unable to look away from row 1, reached out as Darius passed her row. She touched his arm, just briefly, a light touch, 2 seconds, and then she withdrew her hand. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Darius looked at her hand and then at her face. He nodded. Something passed between them that was not pity and not praise. Something that looked more like recognition, like one person acknowledging another person's existence across a distance that should not exist. He walked to the door. On the tarmac, the rain was steady and soft, the kind of English rain that does not make a sound so much as it simply exists, pervading everything. James had an umbrella waiting. Darius waved it away. He did not mind the rain. His phone was already at his ear. "Priya, I'm on the ground." "Mr. Langston." Priya's voice was warm and precise, the voice of someone who has been with you through everything. "The full file on Harrington Capital is pulled. Legal is standing by for your call. Also, I know about the views, 41 million as of 6 minutes ago." She said, "It's moving faster than anything I've tracked. Every major outlet has picked it up. You are the story." A pause. "Are you okay?" Priya asked. Darius looked up at the gray London sky, the rain on his face. The Summit Airlines tail fin of Flight 619 visible above him, midnight blue and gold, the wing logo he had sketched on the back of a napkin in a diner years ago. "I've been okay through worse," he said. "Then let's get to work." He walked toward the Range Rover. Behind him across the tarmac, a police vehicle door closed with a solid final sound. He did not turn around. She just found out the truth. 41 million people watched it happen live. Drop a comment below. Did you see this coming? Heathrow Police Station processes people with the impersonal efficiency of a system that has long since stopped being surprised by human behavior. Vanessa Harrington was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, relieved of her jewelry and her shoelaces and the Dior coat and everything else that had constituted the external architecture of who she told the world she was, with the same methodical thoroughness they applied to everyone, which was exactly the point. She sat in a holding cell that smelled of industrial cleaner and the specific despair of rooms that have held a great many people who did not expect to be there. The fluorescent light above her hummed at a frequency that vibrated in her back teeth. She had been waiting 2 hours. They had told her she would receive her phone when processing was complete. She thought about Carlton. She thought about the call she was going to make. The conversation, his voice when he picked up still half asleep, that specific irritated tone he had when she woke him before 6. He was going to be furious. He was going to sigh the way he sighed when she had bought the second horse, or the time she had caused the scene at the Sotheby's preview. He was going to say, "Vanessa, for God's sake," and then he was going to fix it. Because that was what Carlton did. Carlton fixed things. Carlton had been fixing things for many years, and the things had gotten larger and more expensive and more complicated, but he had always managed. He had people everywhere. He knew people everywhere. He played squash with people who... She stopped herself. He played squash with people. That was enough. She got her phone. She called him. The phone rang 4 times, 5. She tapped her foot against the cold floor of the station's phone room, a small booth off the main processing area where they let you sit and make your call. 6 rings, 7. A click. Carlton's voice. Yes, exactly the tone she had predicted, groggy, irritated, already preparing to be frustrated. "What?" "Carlton, it's me." She heard her own voice and was surprised by it. Smaller than she expected, rougher. The practiced smoothness stripped off by cold and fear and hours of fluorescent light. "It's almost midnight. What?" "I'm in jail," she said. A silence. Then, "I'm sorry. I'm in London. I'm at a police station. They arrested me." She took a breath. "Carlton, I need you to call someone. You know people at the UK embassy, and there must be legal contacts here. International." "What did you do?" Not a question. A statement with a period and a weight that she did not like. It was on the plane. There was this man. He was sitting next to me, and he would not move, and the staff would not do anything, and he kept... "Vanessa." Carlton's voice had sharpened into the register she associated with his work calls, the tone that meant he was calculating something. "What airline?" "Summit Airlines." A silence so complete she checked her phone screen to see if the call had dropped. "Carlton, which plane?" He said it very precisely. "Which route?" "Flight 619, JFK to Heathrow. Why?" "And the man." Carlton's voice had acquired a quality she had never quite heard in it before, not anger. Something colder than anger, something that lived below the register of emotion entirely. "What was his name? Did anyone say his name?" She thought. "I'm the owner." That was what he had said. "He says his name is Langston," she said. "Darius Langston, he claims." The sound on the other end was not a word. It was a sound. Something between a sharp intake of breath and a very specific, very private kind of despair. Then silence. "Carlton? Carlton, do you know him?" Carlton Harrington's voice came back on the line with the careful enunciation of someone constructing sentences very deliberately. The way you speak when you are aware that panicking will cost you more than the original problem. "Vanessa, I need you to listen to me very carefully." She listened. "Darius Langston does not just own Summit Airlines." He said the words the way someone might say, "There are 3 wires, and I have cut the wrong one." Darius Langston holds a controlling stake in First Continental Investment Bank. First Continental is the institution that manages Harrington Capital's liquidity loan portfolio, our primary operating credit lines. If Langston decides tomorrow morning to call those loans... Carlton stopped. She heard him breathing. "If he decides to call them, I have 48 hours to cover a $300 million shortfall, and I cannot cover a $300 million shortfall." Vanessa stared at the wall of the phone booth. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means," Carlton said, and his voice had passed through cold and come out the other side into something she had never heard from him before, something that sounded appallingly like fear. "It means you have handed Darius Langston the keys to everything I have spent 20 years building. You told him, you threatened him using my name. You told him I would shut down his airline. I thought it would scare him," she whispered. "I thought..." "You handed him my head," Carlton said, "on a platter in front of 41 million people." The number hit her. She had known the number. She had seen Maya's phone, the scrolling counter, but she had not fully comprehended it until Carlton said it in his finance voice, the voice that understood what numbers meant. "Carlton," she said, "call your contacts. Fix this. Tell them..." I'm making 2 calls, Carlton said. His voice had gone entirely flat. Corporate counsel to assess the liability exposure to the firm and my personal attorney. For what? Divorce counsel, Carlton said. The word sat in the phone booth like a physical object. Carlton, you've been photographed. You're identified. Your face is on every major news website in the English-speaking world. There is footage of you, clear, high-quality footage, committing what the UK legal system will classify as a hate crime against a man who is, as of this morning, the subject of a story that every human being with a phone has an opinion about. He paused. If I stand beside you, the board removes me. Our investors pull their capital. The SEC investigation I've been managing quietly for the past 6 months, which I have been managing very carefully, Vanessa, very carefully, becomes front-page news. I cannot be associated with what you did. Carlton, don't... Call this number again, he said. The line went dead. She looked at the phone for a long time. The dial tone buzzed against her ear like something dying. In the corner of the room, the camera watched without expression. She set the phone down. She put her head in her hands, and for the first time in the 7 hours since she had boarded Flight 619 at JFK, Vanessa Harrington felt the full weight of what she had done land on her. Not the legal consequences, not the practical fallout, but the thing itself. The look on his face when she had drawn back, the 5 seconds in which he had not moved, the quiet way he had said, I already have everything I need from this conversation. He had known. He had known the whole time exactly what was happening and what it would mean, and he had let it happen with a stillness that she now understood was not passive. It was the opposite of passive. It was the most active choice she had ever watched anyone make. She wept. Not prettily, not with the contained elegance of a woman who has practiced crying in mirrors. Ugly, ragged, alone in a police station. Weeping. The kind that has no audience and no purpose except the simple, necessary business of grief. On the television mounted in the corner of the station's waiting area, which Vanessa could see through the glass partition of the phone booth, the BBC was running the story on a loop. The clip played, her voice amplified and unmistakable, filling the station. You're nothing, you're dirt, you're street trash. And then the spit. And then the 5 seconds in which Darius Langston did not move. An officer at the desk looked at the television, looked through the glass at Vanessa, looked back at the television. He shook his head slowly, not with malice. Just the quiet, disappointed headshake of someone confronting proof of something they had hoped was not as common as it apparently was. Vanessa watched herself on the screen, the face twisted and ugly, the wine stain on the Dior, the certainty in her posture that she was the most important person in that cabin. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor of the phone booth, and she stared at her own reflection in the glass partition. And the woman looking back at her was someone she did not fully recognize. The magistrate's court in London has a particular quality of light. Pale, institutional, arriving through windows that seem designed to admit daylight without warmth. It is a place built to communicate that the law is not interested in comfort, that whatever drama brought you here has been reduced in these walls to the cleanest possible terms. What happened, what the law says about it, and what follows. Vanessa Harrington sat in the dock 2 days later in a gray tracksuit that the court-appointed solicitor had arranged. Her hair was loose. Her face was clean, without the makeup, without the jewelry. She looked her age and then a few years past it, not because she was old, but because 2 days in the custody of her own consequences had a particular kind of aging effect. The courtroom was packed, press in the gallery shuffling quietly, members of the public who had drawn the lottery of the public gallery. Brodie Sinclair was there. He had made a statement and had been called as a witness. Eleanor Voss was there. Her written statement already submitted, 6 pages of precise, measured, credible account. Maya Santos had submitted the full unedited footage. Elena Rivera and Derek Langford had submitted incident reports. The evidence was comprehensive. It was the kind of case that does not require extensive argument. Vanessa's solicitor, Mr. Alden Finch, a decent, tired man who had been given 14 minutes with his client before the hearing, and had used 13 of them to explain why pleading guilty and requesting mercy was the only viable strategy. sat beside her with the resigned efficiency of someone who has been asked to build a house with one plank and three nails. The prosecutor, Ms. Tara Okafor, a sharp, precise woman who had been assigned this case, stood and addressed the bench with the economy of someone who understands that the evidence requires very little embellishment. Your Honor, the defendant did not simply assault a fellow passenger. She assaulted him because of who he was. She used language designed to degrade. She used her perceived social position as a weapon. She escalated repeatedly over a 7-hour flight. And when all other methods failed, she used physical violence. The facts are not in dispute. They are documented in 4K. Vanessa flinched as the clip played on the screen beside the bench. She had seen it dozens of times since her arrest, but watching it in the formal quiet of a courtroom was different. The sound of her own voice, that particular pitch of contemptuous certainty, bounced off the wood-paneled walls and seemed to fill every cubic inch of the room. The magistrate judge Helen Price was a precise woman who had been sitting on this bench for many years and had seen a full range of the things human beings do to one another when they believe nobody will stop them. She looked at the defendant. She looked at the evidence. Her expression was not angry. It was measured in the way of someone who has learned that measured responses carry further than emotional ones. Darius stood when it was his turn. He did not carry paper. The courtroom was absolutely quiet. Your Honor, he said, I have built an airline that employs 47,000 people of every background, every faith, every part of this world. I have flown millions of miles. I have sat in thousands of cabins like the one on Flight 619. I have never in my life been treated with such open, deliberate hatred as I was by Mrs. Harrington. He looked at the bench, not at Vanessa, but every person in the room knew who he was speaking for. She did not spit on me because I was in her seat. She spat on me because she could not conceive of a world where a man who looks like me could be her equal. She had made that decision before I sat down, before I opened my mouth, before she knew a single thing about me. She made it the moment she saw me. He paused. The room did not move. I am not here for revenge. I am here because actions have consequences, and because the only thing that changes a pattern is when the consequences are real. I want her to understand, not as punishment, but as truth, that the world she was trying to protect on that plane does not exist. It never did. It was a story she told herself, and it cost us both something that day. He sat down. Judge Price looked at the defendant for a long moment. Then, Mrs. Harrington, please stand. Vanessa stood. Her legs trembled. The charges: common assault and racially aggravated harassment. I find you guilty on both counts. This was not a moment of madness or an isolated lapse in judgment. This was the culmination of a deliberate pattern of behavior sustained over a 7-hour flight, witnessed by multiple credible individuals and documented comprehensively. You showed no remorse during the incident. You attempted to deflect, to fabricate, and to use your husband's name as a weapon against the very people your behavior had injured. The gavel. I am sentencing you to 5 months in HMP Bronzefield. You will serve no less than half of that term. You are ordered to pay compensation of £40,000 to the flight crew of Summit Airlines Flight 619. You are banned for life from Summit Airlines and all partner carriers. Vanessa's mouth opened. Prison, she said. Her voice was barely audible. You can't. I'm not. I've never. Take her down, Judge Price said. As the bailiffs reached for her arms, Vanessa looked across the courtroom for the last time. Darius Langston was looking back at her. His expression was not triumph. It was not anger. It was something she could not read, something that looked from where she stood almost like sadness. Not for himself, for the waste of it, for the unnecessary, entirely avoidable, irreversible waste of it. The door closed behind her with a sound like something ending. 3 weeks later, in the conference room of a law firm in Midtown Manhattan, Darius's legal team laid the documentation on the table for the SEC. They had been building this file for months. The incident on Flight 619 had not created the case. It had simply accelerated the timeline. Carlton Harrington's strategy of short-selling Summit stock while simultaneously interfering with Summit's banking relationships had been documented in meticulous detail. The communications, the trading records, the coordination with third parties. The SEC opened a formal investigation within the week. Harrington Capital's board ousted Carlton at an emergency board meeting 9 days after the announcement. The vote was not close. A photographer captured him leaving his Midtown office building carrying a cardboard box. He was wearing a suit that cost $4,000, and he looked like a man who had just understood what it feels like to be assessed at a glance and found to be less than expected. The box held a stapler, 2 pens, and a framed photograph of himself with a governor at a fundraiser dinner 3 years prior. He was not destroyed, but diminished, genuinely, measurably, in ways that would prove permanent. Yes, his name, which had been a currency in a very specific world, had been devalued, not canceled, reduced, which was perhaps more precise. 6 months after Flight 619, the story of Summit Airlines had changed. Not in the way of companies that survive a scandal by managing the news cycle and waiting for attention to move elsewhere, but in the deeper, less visible way of an institution that has been tested and has used the test to become more clearly what it was always trying to be. Darius implemented one new policy, and it was written in plain language, and it appeared on every Summit boarding pass printed after that September. Not a slogan in small print at the bottom, front and center above the departure information. Every passenger on this aircraft is equal, no exceptions. It was not a marketing line, it was a standard. Elena Rivera was promoted to head of first-class operations. Maya Santos won Summit's first ever passenger advocacy award. Derek Langford received a formal commendation from the airline's board that he framed and hung in his home. Brody Sinclair published an essay about what he had witnessed. It was read millions of times. The line that got quoted most was, "I've been in rooms with some of the most powerful people alive, and I have never seen anyone hold themselves the way Darius Langston held himself that day. That is not weakness. That is the most powerful thing I have ever witnessed." Eleanor Voss sent Darius a copy of her notarized witness statement along with a handwritten note on plain paper. It said, "For the record, in case you ever need reminding that most people, when the moment actually comes, will choose to do the right thing." Vanessa served her minimum sentence. She exited Bronzefield 3 months later, thinner, quieter. Her visa was not renewed. She found a room in a shared flat in Hounslow. She got a job cleaning offices near Heathrow. She told no one her name. Carlton was not imprisoned. He was fined, his trading licenses suspended, his professional reputation carved down to something functional but narrow. He did not call Vanessa. She did not call him. The divorce was finalized in absentia 18 months after Flight 619. London Heathrow, Terminal 5. Late morning. The terminal had that particular brightness of a day when the clouds have parted unexpectedly, and the sun comes through the high windows at an angle that makes everything look briefly significant. Darius walked through arrivals in a navy suit well fitted, the Summit pin on his lapel catching the light. He had a board meeting in the city in 2 hours. He had built in time. He always built in time. He stopped at a coffee stand near the arrivals exit. The morning rush had cleared. The counter was calm. A woman in a generic cleaning company polo shirt was wiping down a table nearby, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned to do this job well. Her hair was cut short. Her hands were reddened from chemical exposure. She dropped the cloth, bent to pick it up. As she straightened, she turned slightly, and Darius saw her face. He recognized her. He stood still for a moment, then he said her name. Vanessa. She went completely still. Her back was to him. He watched her shoulders stop moving, watched the specific whole-body recognition travel through her frame. Slowly, she turned around. When she saw his face, the color left hers in a wave. She took one step back, not in aggression, not in performance. Just the involuntary physical response of a person confronting something they have been carrying a long time. She looked at his suit, at the Summit pin, at his hands, which were open at his sides. She looked very, very tired. She looked real. "Are you okay?" Darius asked. The question seemed to take her completely off guard. She blinked. Of all the things she had imagined, and in the 6 months since her release, she had imagined this encounter in many different forms, this was not one of them. Not this tone, not this simplicity. She started. Her voice was rougher than before. "I'm fine, I'm working." "I can see that." The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was honest. the particular honesty of two people who have been through something real together and have no need to pretend otherwise. She looked at the floor, then at him. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. The words came out with difficulty, like something that had been rehearsed in private and was now being said in the actual world for the first time, which is always harder. "I'm not asking for that. I owe you something more than that moment. I know that. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." Or, she said the last two words simply, without qualification, without condition, without the performative gesture of a person who is apologizing for an audience. There was nobody watching. The coffee stand attendant was cleaning the machine. The terminal moved around them with its usual indifferent purpose. Darius was quiet for a moment. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a card. He placed it on the table between them. "Summit Second Chance," he said. "It's a program for people rebuilding. Job training, placements, support, real wages. We have people in logistics and ground operations who started there." She stared at the card, the Summit logo, the midnight blue and gold. "Why would you?" she started. "Because I'm not building something better so I can watch people fall," Darius said. "I'm building it so they don't have to." He paused. "You call the number on the card. You tell them Darius sent you. They won't ask about the past. They'll ask about the future." She looked at the card for a long time. Then she looked at him, really looked at him the way she should have looked at him years ago at Gate 47, in the moment, before she decided who he was. "Mr. Langston," she said. Her voice cracked on the last syllable. He waited. "Thank you." He nodded once, a real nod. Not forgiveness declared, not absolution granted, but acknowledgement of something true passing between two people. Then he picked up his coffee from the counter, turned, and walked toward the exit doors. He did not look back, but somewhere between the coffee stand and the terminal exit, somewhere in the space of those 30 yards, something moved through him that was not triumph, and was not satisfaction, and was not even quite peace. It was something quieter and more durable than any of those things. It was the feeling of a man who has lived long enough with his own principles to know what they actually cost and who has chosen them anyway. Again, in the specific moment where the choice was real and the cost was real and nobody was watching. He thought about the yellow legal pad, the dormitory room, the 4 words at the top of the first page. An airline for everyone. He was still building it, one decision at a time. He walked through the terminal doors into the London morning. Dignity is not something that can be taken from you by someone who does not understand its value. Darius Langston knew that at 19, alone in 3 airplane seats, and he proved it years later in a first-class cabin at 38,000 feet, in the longest 5 seconds any of the 41 million people who watched them would ever see. He did not win by raising his voice. He won by never needing to. If this story moved something in you, please give this video a like right now. It takes 2 seconds and it helps more people find stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder today that dignity cannot be taken from you. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories about people who refuse to be erased, and there are many more coming. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to hold yourself together in a moment that cost you everything? We want to hear from you.